This is Jason David Frank, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
One day, everything changed. I'm not sure how I survived. I was all alone.
Looks like a body. Whoa, the way you fell from the sky, I thought that maybe you were an angel or something.
What?
Yeah, I had to catch you. It's Laputa, a floating island.
An island that floats in the sky?
Yep. Most people think it's just a legend, but my dad actually saw it. Nobody believed him. I am going to prove that my dad was no liar.
Look, my stone's glowing. It's been in my family as long as I can remember.
That crystal is extremely powerful.
Huh?
Lady, come back here!
There are pirates chasing us, and the army's right behind them.
I want that pistol! Somebody's got to protect your friend.
It's my fault getting you mixed up in all of this.
Are you kidding? This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me.
You've bungled things, sir, and now I must fix them.
I wonder who that guy is and what he's doing with the army.
To try to use the crystal's power for selfish reasons will bring great unhappiness.
You know, the odds are against you.
They simply don't understand. The same technology that kept Laputa airborne also made it a major power that once dominated the entire planet. Shoot anyone who resists!
What'll we do?
Come on. Beyond that cloud is a floating city that no one here on Earth believes exists.
We're going in! We have an emergency.
Hands up!
The way to Laputa has been opened!
Arrest him!
Please let me come with you. I need to save her.
I'm telling you, this thing is alive!
Stop it! You're destroying everything!
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cinema Geeks as we continue our Hayo Miyazaki Retrospective. Today we are reviewing his third film, Castle in the Sky. Finally, a title that is easy to say. I can say it all correctly. Joining me on today's adventure, as always, is Kevin Optimus Solo. How's it going, man?
Not too bad. Glad to be here.
Of course, we have Hard Candy Mandy.
Heyo, Miyazaki.
And
I had to do it again.
And last but not least, Matt Fridley-Sant.
Hi.
For those joining for the first time or those return visitors, yes, we are going through the career of Hayao Miyazaki. We started with Lupin, and now we are at the third film, Castle in the Sky. Going into this, we are coming from a variety of different backgrounds. Myself, Matt, and Amanda have all seen some of his films. Kevin, you're the newbie here, coming in this blind, this being the first time you've watched any of his movies. With Castle in the Sky coming up this episode, let's just get some general thoughts here. Kevin, overall, what were your impressions of Castle in the Sky?
My initial impression after we got done viewing this film, which I think is going to differ maybe from some people on the panel, but my initial reaction was that this was my favorite of the films that we've seen so far. I think there's elements of each of the films that I like, but as far as like an overall package, I think for me this one has been the most enjoyable. So that was kind of my initial reaction. Now, I've had the opportunity to watch at least portions of this film a second time, and obviously had some time to think about it and digest it. And there are some minor issues that I'll possibly bring up, some nitpicks, but I still think it is sitting as the best of the three for me. I don't know if that will always be the case. I think Nausicaa might grow on me as time goes and maybe surpass this one, but just on like an initial viewing, Castle in the Sky has been my favorite experience as a whole.
Interesting. I was not expecting that. I'm about to get into that
here
further.
To shock people.
Yeah, it's for shock. Amanda, I know for Nausicaa, it put you to sleep. You were not the biggest fan of it. Was that the one you almost started a fire with? I forget. I did.
Almost.
Yeah. So
I catch myself on fire.
Are you along the same lines as Kevin? You think it's the best of all the movies we've talked about so far?
So far, man, I don't know, because I think that some of the Lupin stuff I really, really enjoyed. But this, I think I could get behind a little bit more. Nausicaa, I really liked the main character and stuff. But as far as overall, I think I had a lot more fun and was able to stay awake longer in this film than the other ones. I only missed out on the last little bit, so we did have to rewatch it again. I don't know what it is.
We're watching movies at the wrong time of day for Amanda.
Yeah. But I don't think that has any reflection on the movie. I don't think it was slow paced. I think there was a lot of adventure, and like Kevin said, there's probably going to be a little nitpicking here and there, but overall, I think I enjoyed the experience.
Interesting. Matt, your thoughts on Castle in the Sky?
I think this is the last one that I haven't seen of all of the Miyazaki ones, except for maybe the last one or two, which I have bought but haven't watched yet. Other than that, like, I've seen everything else we're going to watch the next couple of weeks. So this one was like, except for I had started this one when me and my fiance were just starting to date. This was one of her favorite movies, so she showed it to me, and I fell asleep during it, just like I was Amanda or something.
Taking a page out of my book.
But like, I don't know. It's what I expect from a Miyazaki movie. Like so like I was pleased in that regard.
Interesting. Unlike you, Kevin, I wouldn't put it up the best. I still think Nausicaa to me is the best we've gone so far. It is the first Miyazaki movie I've watched twice that we've covered, because I remember now why I thought this was his first film, is because this is the very first Studio Ghibli film. Before that, you had Lupin, which was another property he was working on, and then he had his first feature film, which was that of Nausicaa, but this was the first time that Studio Ghibli was established, and I think you do see kind of it's establishing the tone of that. It's different in the sense of it's a little bit more, I'd say, family friendly, kid friendly. It's not, I think, dumbed down in any way, but I think Nausicaa was a little bit more harsh. It had the violence maybe a little harder and friendly. Here, I think the humor is more overt, and I think the characters are a little bit more along the lines of not necessarily Disney-fied, but a little bit more so regarding that. I did enjoy it. I thought it was overall, again, like Matt mentioned, very, very much what I expect with a Miyazaki film. Very epic adventure. It coming off the heels of Nausicaa, it just didn't have the same effect for me. I guess I didn't find it as enthralling or as epic as that film, but I do think there is a lot to get into, and I think it's still a really good movie along those lines. And
I think what sorry to interject, but I think what you're saying as far as this being the first Studio Ghibli film and kind of being able to feel those effects and maybe some Disney, almost Disney-esque influence. Obviously, we have the Disney dub of this, etc. I think that has something to do with the fact that on my initial watch, I enjoyed this one more, but also why I was trying to reference that, like, maybe a couple years down the road or 5 years down the road, if I were to watch these two movies again, why I think I would possibly gravitate more towards Nausicaa on a second viewing, or why maybe over time it would stick with me more. I think there is a little bit more, like you're saying, more mature strands to Nausicaa, and some things that I think with time will resonate more. So I can totally see what you're saying with it. I don't know if it all has to do with maybe Studio Ghibli or, those Disney-esque elements, or maybe the more kid-friendly stuff, that why this one's maybe more appealing on a first watch for me, but why I think it maybe would lose a little of ground as time went on, where Nausicaa might improve for me. I don't know if I'm alone in thinking that.
They still pistol whipped and shot at kids in this.
But they kind of deserved it, to be fair. There's still some not questionable things, but I think it's still not like, a G-rated, type of adventures. It still has some adult themes. And I know, speaking of themes, last record, when we talked about Nausicaa, one of the complaints that was brought up was that a lot of the themes were overly overt at times and maybe a little heavy-handed. Do you think with this being more on the element of family friendly, with that tone kind of toned down a little bit, does that become more acceptable because it is certainly geared at a different audience, at least, or did it kind of avoid that, and where it wasn't so overt with its messaging and it was a little bit more cryptic with it?
I don't think I saw it as necessarily cryptic, but I also didn't feel like it was ever just in your face with it. Like I think for any intelligent person viewing this film, you can easily pick out the themes. It's not like you have to have a guide to the film or watch it 4 times to get some of the elements. I mean, I think those things are very readily available for you to pick up on. But I never, while I was watching it, was thinking, I never got taken out of the film to the point where I'm like, this film is trying to preach at me or trying to really, I mean, maybe it's because they didn't name any things, Toxic Jungle or whatever it might be.
They did call it Castle in the Sky, which is legitimately a castle in the sky. So.
Yes, but I just never got a heavy-handedness feel from this film. I don't know, like you said, if it's quote unquote maybe dumbed down to a point where it doesn't come across that, but I didn't feel like it was dumbed down either. I never got the overt message, but it was still clear what it's trying to get at. For me,
I definitely wasn't as felt like I didn't get punched in the face over and over again with the message. I felt like I could get wrapped up in the adventure of it and still kind of feel those hints towards the the moral that they were trying to go for. Unlike Nausicaa, where it was just over and over ad nauseum.
Matt, I know you mentioned that you said that you feel like this kind of gives you what you expect with a Miyazaki film. Considering we're like 3 movies in at this moment in time, when you say that, what are some things you feel like makes that of a Miyazaki movie? Something like, what are aspects or traits that tend to have stood out within these 3 films that do establish themselves as, okay, this is what you're going to get when you watch a Studio Ghibli or Miyazaki movie?
Definitely, with the exception of maybe the Lupin movie, because that was already an established franchise. If I'm watching a Studio Ghibli movie, or specifically a Miyazaki movie, I'm going to absolutely expect some magical realism. Like, it's going to be things that are not how our world is, but not so beyond belief that I'm going to be like, that's not happening. It's rarely high fantasy. And a couple of them, you could definitely argue that it's high fantasy rather than low fantasy. But, like, there's definitely going to be some magical realism. There's usually going to be some, adventure. Like, it's rare that it stays in one place, and when it does stay in one place, it definitely has adventure themes that kind of get that, like, we're moving feeling to it.
I was going to ask, too, because you guys have seen maybe more of the films, and so I don't know if it's going to be a theme that carries out through the rest of his filmography, but I can definitely see it so far in the films that we've watched. Is it going to stick with us as far as the ambiguity of the not necessarily clearly defined antagonist, protagonist, or bad or good, where there's a lot more of that gray, undefined area? Is that something that we're going to see throughout the rest of the films, or is that something that's only present in these early ones?
You're absolutely going to get that in other ones. Like, I would argue that especially in My Neighbor Totoro, because I guess that's kind of a thing that he wants to play with, is like, you're usually the hero of your own story, and so it's hard to have defined, this is the good person, this is the bad person, unless you really do just hit people over the head with it.
Right.
So I
think
shoot
kids in the face.
Sure. Kill an old king in his bed. I would say, if anything, it's going to get more ambiguous as to who to side with, I guess, or who's bad and who's good.
Yeah, I would agree with that, thinking of something like, especially Spirited Away, where, similar with this, where you have all these different kind of factions where they all have different goals, and maybe not all of them are necessarily morally corrupt as much as the other ones. Like, even like you have pirates here who clearly have intentions that aren't necessarily pure, but their actions maybe or show that they have hearts, and they're not basically the bad guys. But it really feels like these characters are all kind of working in the same world, and it's all trying to find a balance with something, typically, where they all kind of need to exist in their own way. It's just finding a way for them to balance each other out without kind of destroying the world that they're in. It seems to be a constant force with him, or where you see a character that you assume is going to be, okay, this is the villain of this movie, but that ends up not being the case as it goes on.
I think what it leads to so far is it makes the arcs of the characters much more interesting than what you would get, like, maybe in like just a dumbed down kids movie, where you have these clearly defined, like, this is just your archetypical, bad or good character, and they're going to have all the good or bad traits that you're used to, and blah, 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 blah. And you don't really get to see much outside of they might make some random decision that all of a sudden, they switch or have a twist or whatever. But it seems more artificial in those types of films, whereas this one, it seems like it's much more genuine. There's much more of a realistic arc to a lot of the characters in these films, at least from what we've seen in the first three.
A lot of what I've come to expect with out of a Miyazaki film comes out in these two first movies, and one of that being just, we talked about like the adventure aspect of it, and one thing I was amazed by this was just Miyazaki's ability in the animator's ability to really establish scale with this world, and like with the ships, and kind of just seeing them compared to one another, really get the sense of like danger in that aspect. And then when you bring on the landscape of the castle in the sky, and it just really gives it that immersed feeling where it's like you're entering into this brand huge new world because of just the way it's able to kind of divvy out its landscapes and its animation in that realm. I don't know how you guys felt about that. If this did feel like a enormous world through its ability to establish scale.
Well, I thought it did, and I thought it was also interesting the way that it uses, instead of using like Earth as like the focal point or the setting, it obviously seems like, as is in the title, that we're really focusing on the sky as the main backdrop of this, and where everything's either headed or coming from, or kind of the angles and the perspectives that we get to. So I thought it was interesting how it uses the sky in this one to do what you're saying and kind of create that scale as well. So yeah, I can see what you're saying on that.
I definitely got a real Atlantis or like El Dorado vibe. The journey to get there, and then the desire to get the treasures that are there and harness the technology or what kind of power they have. It definitely had that feel, but with its own properties thrown in there.
Yeah, you can definitely get little bits and pieces of a lot of those folk stories or different, obviously it has admittedly been taken somewhat from Gulliver's Travels and some older folk stories like that and stuff like that. So I mean, I think there's a way to see all of that. But like I said, I just like the way that they use the sky to kind of, like what Dan was saying, project the scale of things and kind of the perspective in a way.
And to speak on how well thought out and diverse this world is like, that's a thing you can expect with a Miyazaki movie. Like, any one of them is going to feel like a unique world and yet be recognizable enough that you can pick it up. Like, from Howl's Moving Castle to Spirited Away, they're all going to have elements that are real and elements that are fantastical. And they're not all going to be the same. I mean, I think some people might argue that they could all be in the same universe. But, like, they're all very unique in their own way and very well thought out. It's like one of those things where it's like, it might have been a 100-page script, but they probably wrote 10,000 pages just to make sure the world felt old and felt real, and things that never make it into anyone's mouths were thought about and detailed, and you might see it in the background, but it's way more in depth than you're ever going to see a lot of worlds in a lot of Hollywood movies, maybe.
And I feel like too, it leaves enough ambiguity that where you don't know, there's this abandoned universe or this abandoned thing, and you have an idea. You can try to put things together, but I think it gives you just enough, and I think it like. You can see that it does feel like, just through the detail and what's there, that it does feel like this was all thought out and there are answers to all these questions. You just don't have them, and you don't necessarily need them, but there's a mystery part of it that makes it that more appealing, because you're just like, okay, let me try to figure out, okay, what did that do? What was the purpose of these robots? Like, or is this alien technology? There are a lot of kind of questions that you could ask yourself within, what exactly this is. And I like the fact that they didn't feel the need to answer those questions.
Well, and it also kind of goes to like what you're saying about with why I think some of the messages and some of the themes aren't necessarily heavy-handed, because obviously one theme that you could very easily identify with or see played out is the whole idea that we have somewhat of a technology versus nature position put out there. But it still remains somewhat ambiguous, because even when you get to this castle in the sky, which is clearly a bastion for nature and what all is encompassed there, but then you also still have it with these technological robots that are defending it in a way. So I mean, it's like even in its message, it still finds a way to somewhat gray the area and make it so it's not necessarily all one way or all the other.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it makes you wonder, like, was this a human creation? You know, where exactly did this come from, and which I enjoyed. And talking about the robots, one thing we didn't really get into yet were the characters themselves. This is the first movie we got to where the character's name wasn't they didn't have a titular character. It wasn't in the title, but we do have plenty of characters. Again, from Cheetah to Pazu to Dola. Any characters that stand out to you guys? Ones that you felt were was it up to the task compared to the other films when it comes to having notable characters, or do you feel like overall it's the story that really is the strength here?
I'll let Matt go first, because I want to hear his take before. I have one character specifically that I'm going to talk about a little bit in depth.
Oh, like I think generally in a Miyazaki movie, the only thing that's as impressive or close to as impressive as just the beautiful sprawling world are the characters, who usually feel complete and real. I don't really have a lot of like standout. Maybe it's just because they're all so interesting. Like, I think Patsu is a little I don't know, naive. He's a little too nice. He's a daydreamer. He's very Luke Skywalker-ish. Like, I don't want to be here, but I'm still going to work hard and daydream about not being here. And so he, like, that makes him incredibly relatable. That he's, like this, just like a kid about to go on a grand adventure, and he that's all he ever wants, and it's going to be too much for him, and it's going to be great and well written. So I guess that's who I relate with. That's more or less the question.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily thinking specifically of who I related to the most, but the character that I found the most entertaining and the one that I liked the most was Dola. I don't know what it was, if it was just because Cloris Leachman was the one that was doing the voice, or maybe how it was written, etc. But I thought that character was so fun. I could have watched an entire movie just with her and her pirate family. But I don't know. I mean, there's some character art there, as far as obviously her intentions at the beginning and her actions towards the end wouldn't necessarily match up together. So there is some change over the course of the film for her. But I don't know, it was like a combination of the character from the Goonies, the mom of the two criminals. It was like a combination of that plus like the mom from DuckTales, like the Beagle Boys mom, and I just loved seeing that, and then everything that kind of came about with that. I mean, at one point the movie, to me, almost, when they become part of the pirate crew, I guess you could say, at the one point, it was almost like it was going to go off on this whole different movie. Like, we were just going to forget everything else that had happened prior to that, and we were just going to become, as they become part of this crew, etc. And I was down for it, actually. I was like, okay, let's just go this direction for a while. And so, I mean, I really like Dola as a character. She was my favorite.
She was mine too. I think that she had some really awesome lines. Her like outlandish behavior was pretty sweet, and she like whipped off a skirt at one point and had pants underneath. I'm like, she is ready all the time to get into some mischief.
Yeah, she was a lot of fun, and I do agree. Like, she was probably brought a lot of life to the movie. I liked. I was funny that you mentioned Mark. You mentioned Luke Skywalker, considered the American version. Mark Hamill does do the voice of Muska.
Yeah,
and. Him as a villain, I thought, was probably maybe one of the weaker spots for me, in the sense of, like, I got him. I thought he just felt like he didn't, I think, compared to the other characters, bring a lot to the table. Patsy was fun, was another solid character. I did find, though, the relationship with him and Cheetah was really enjoyable, but I did find, like, the way that the pirates acted towards her was kind of creepy. It's like, these are grown men, and I would assume she's a kid. I don't know for sure, but it was like, I'm like, that's a little bit, we're getting a little weird here. So.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I was actually looking up trying to find as much information and redoing my research about it, and apparently the age of those two main characters differs depending on if you're watching the original version or one of the dub versions. Because I guess originally they were supposed to be, at least Sheeta was almost supposed to be coming across as like a mother figure to them rather than a romantic interest, is what it was saying, because it says that James Van Der Beek and Anna Paquin, the way that they're voiced makes them more of like a mid-teen instead of a preteen. So it seems like, I guess, depending on which version you watch and different things like that, it changes some of that stuff, because there was definitely modifications to the dialogue that was spoken from the Dola Gang to Sheeta as we got to the English dub for that. So, I think the way that they did do that ended up making it seem a little creepy, like you were saying, Dan.
Super Lech style.
Yeah, I think the only reason I couldn't relate, or not relate, but the only reason maybe I didn't like Pazu and Sheeta as much as some of the other characters is nothing to do with the actual characters, nor anything to do with how the characters are written or their actions, but the voice work from James Van Der Beek and Anna Paquin is not up to par. James Van Der Beek is not a voice actor, and nor was he even really that talented at anything at that age when he was doing the dub of this. Not that he is now either.
I was going to say, you could just say actor. You didn't really need to say voice. So.
And Anna Paquin is I think a better actor than Van Der Beek, but there must have been no coaching or directing as far as her accents were going, because she was from 17 different places over the course of this film. And I kept getting thrown off by either the British or the Australian touches and accents that she was putting when she would say certain words, and then at other times she was nondescript and had no accent whatsoever. And it was, for some reason, I don't know if I'm just like more nitpicky when it comes to voices, but I was thrown off a little with the way that her voice was portrayed. And I haven't seen the other English dub, because I think there's two of them, right? There's like somewhat of a older one from the late 80s or early 90s. And then there's the Disney one. I just saw the Disney one, but yeah, the voice for Sheeta was a little distracting, I guess, for me.
Yeah, I don't know if there was another dub. Only one I'm aware of is the one done by Disney. When I watched this, I didn't know who the cast was. Like, I had no idea it was James Van Der Beek or Anna Paquin. I felt the performances were fine. Like I guess when it comes to a dubbed anime film from Disney, I don't have high expectations when it comes to the voice acting, so I tend not to. Well,
I think that was the thing, though, is that they sprinkled in legit voice actors. Like, you have Mark Hamill, you have Jim Cummings, you have even Mandy Patinkin, who is just a phenomenal actor in general. And so, I mean, it was more so, I think, like I don't expect much from those dubs, but then when all of a sudden you find one that has a bunch of like actual legit voice actors, then the ones that aren't, for me, stood out a little bit more.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know, Matt, if you had any issues at all with any of the voice acting performances.
I am not nearly as picky as Kevin is about voice actors. I mean, he comes from a place of more knowledge, so I get that. I liked James Van Der Beek's performance. I mean, it wasn't award-winning in any way, but like I could definitely, I felt like he wasn't off. I do agree that the accent of Sheeta changed a bit between scenes, which was not pleasant, but not as distracting. If I wasn't watching with Kevin, it would have been like, oh, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't take me out of it.
I was super distracted by it. Super distracted.
You were probably watching it with Kevin. He would do that.
Yeah, my bad. But I don't necessarily think it's James Van Der Beek as much as the fact that I know it's James Van Der Beek.
It doesn't help that they do that intro sequence before you start watching it, or you definitely get the Van Der Beek.
Yeah.
This happens a lot with the Disney Studio Ghibli movies. Is they focus heavily on big names. Like another weird one is in Princess Mononoke. The main she-wolf is played by Gillian Anderson. I don't know why, but that's who it is.
Yeah, I think there's like Billy Bob Thornton's in that too,
yep.
Which just seems weird. It's just like, this is why, of all people, yeah.
Yeah. Expect more.
Considering that, were you guys ever inspired to maybe watch the dub, not the dub version, but the original language version, just with subtitles? Has anyone ever done that to see if there is a big difference between the language that's used?
I haven't, but I would be interested to do that because they also said that in doing the Disney dub of this, that they were also concerned because, a lot of times, characteristic of a lot of anime films is that there's some silences and there's pauses and, staring and stuff like that. And so Disney decided to throw in a whole bunch of more dialogue than was existent in the original one to try to make sure that kids' attention was staying with the film. And I think that's where we get a lot of these one-liners and these like little quick supposedly witty lines that come across that seem so misplaced. I don't know. There's like a mom joke in there that I can't imagine was in the original one. There's at one point they say "Why the deuce," which I didn't know people said that in that decade. And I don't know. There was just like these little one-liners and quips that were added in that I think some of them were a little too obvious that they were artificial to the film. And I would be interested to see it in the subtitle version, which I know a lot of people prefer, and that's like the preferred method of watching these, and they would say never watch the actual dub version. So I would be interested to see a couple of these again with that version.
Yeah, and Matt, have you ever watched the original language version of it, any of the Miyazaki films?
No, I haven't. And I'm not one of the like I hate those original language purists where it's like because anime and it gets like the other animes you get into, it gets like there are some animes that are really terrible, but I think the Disney Miyazaki movies have done a pretty decent job throughout. And there might be a little few weirdnesses or inconsistencies, but like I'm never gonna be like I gotta see it in the other one.
No, I don't think I would necessarily feel like I have to see it. I would be interested at least one time to watch one of them just to see if I can pick up on the differences or to see if it makes it like for example in this one, if you get what Dan was talking about, if that scene comes across as creepy in the original language version, or if it seems like it just is not so lecherous.
It was interesting you mentioned like she was meant to be more of a mom character, because then one of the characters says something about loving you, so I wondered if that was like Disney being weird and like, let's make this seem more creepy than it needed to seem.
Possibly.
Was there anything else anyone want to bring up regarding the film?
I don't know how I'd feel about getting woken up at dawn by a trumpeter. I just don't know if I would be okay with that. But I think that she does look is super similar to like Kiki's. So it definitely got me excited to see Kiki's Delivery Service again, even though that's probably the one I've been excited the most about seeing. And I think that bringing up like the flying ships again and stuff, those were super intricate and super cool. But you could tell, again, like with the factions, like how they looked and dressed. Anything from the military was like camo, even like the fortress. Like it's made out of stone and stuff. Why does it need to be like camo? I don't get it. And you're flying in the sky, not in the trees, so why does it need to be camo? But I get it.
I did learn something about clouds though in this film, and that is that they do in fact stop bullets, so that is good to know.
Only magical clouds?
You can only magical clouds, true.
Dude, and that henchman in like the black derby hat and the glasses, he looked like Fallon from The Prestige. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Christian Bale's like twin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gave that
I didn't
away.
pick up on that.
But in Mark Hamill's super Hannibal Lecter creepy line, he's like, "It's really quite dead, you know." And I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm pretty sure that was in some Hannibal Lecter movie." Sounded exactly like Anthony Hopkins, something we would say. So
I think the only thing that we haven't talked about that I kind of picked up on, maybe not so much towards the end of the film, but especially at the beginning, was the musical score and the music. That trumpet song that they're playing at the very beginning was awesome, and I think the music is obviously maybe one more thing that I've heard other people mention as far as Miyazaki films, that the music plays a big part, but I could definitely see it in this one. It was I very much enjoyed the beginning segments with the music involved.
I think the biggest redeeming thing about this movie was how much heart Patsu had, and like his willingness to just like help and like embrace the adventure of it, and I think that was kind of what pulled me along.
Yeah, I could see that. I guess the Patsu, I think, was certainly a good aspect of the film. I think my one That one's concerned is a strong word, but I think the one thing that has this not work as well as the last film was just Sheeta. I think his overall character. I was hoping we'd get more from her. I mean, I guess in a way she's wallflower is a strong word, but she didn't necessarily have the command. And maybe that's because that's the character. She's kind of basically just trying to figure herself out. But by the end, she does kind of take charge. So maybe I'm just being a little bit nitpicky and not allowing her to develop. But overall, like I did quite enjoy it. I guess my one concern, or the one thing that knocks it a little bit, is that with these two films, we saw such a huge leap when it comes to filmmaking from the first film to the second one, and maybe it's a lot to expect to see a similar leap or similar increase, where I felt like this kind of wasn't along the same lines as the last movie, if not a little bit less, which I think maybe I was hoping you would see a continuous progression regarding filmmaking. Not that it's worse, but it just I guess it's hard. It's a hard hill to climb because they're all great, so it's hard to keep repeating that success and keep topping yourself in a new way. But
yeah, that'd be pretty impressive if you could make that exact leap through from film to film all the way through this, because there's a lot of films. But a lot of people probably say that he does for a certain film. So, but I can see what you're saying, that it seems like not as big of a leap between these two. I think as far as my nitpicks, I think there is a little bit of a little clunkiness sometimes as far as the direction that we're going, because I think that sometimes they're willing to let it develop naturally, and then other times they're in a hurry to get from one thing to the other. So at times I feel like the pace is real rushed, and that at other times it's just not slow but more of a natural pace, and it seems like you're not quite sure which direction you're going to stick with. Like every time you think the movie's going to go this direction, it starts going another direction, which isn't always necessarily bad or inherently bad with a film, but every once in a while I felt it a little bit clunky in that respect. But I will say that I do appreciate how fast Dola was able to science that thing up and figure out the velocity of the wind, the velocity of the ship, and the fact that they were going to catch the Goliath. That was pretty impressive science work on her part.
Math and maps, man. That's all you need. Matt, do you have anything else you wanted to bring up that we didn't touch upon?
No, but I've kind of fallen into a rabbit hole trying to find the original dub, which came out in the late 80s. And might be next to impossible to get nowadays.
All right.
I'm sure Disney's trying to bury it as much as they possibly can.
I've got a lot of mixed reviews on the internet about how good it is, and it seems like one guy says it seems like every line was given one take and they just went with what they had. But it is a more literal translation if that's what you really want.
The other thing that's somewhat I found interesting in doing my research for the film was the fact that apparently Disney waited a long time from the time that they got the rights to this to when they released it, and there was a bunch of different delays and whatnot. And I guess there's this whole conspiracy amongst fans of the Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki's work that said that the only reason Disney purchased the library was so that they could somewhat undermine the releases of the films, so that they weren't as successful as regular Disney films. But that seems weird to me, that you would purchase something and then try to make it so it didn't sell as well. So I don't know how much I can buy that.
Well, if anyone would do that, that would be Disney.
But apparently there's this whole theory that there was these different things that they point to as far as the different releases and stuff like that they were saying was intentionally done by Disney to make them not as successful in the US as they had been in Japan. So I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised. There's always this fear, I think, when it comes to taking a property from Japan and bringing it over. And I think people, for some reason, don't think it's going to work with mass audiences, or they don't think that, it's going to be beyond the niche of the anime crowd. So that's why they throw in these big stars and thinking these names will get people to maybe watch it that would not necessarily watch an animated film. Right. So, and I think we're seeing less and less of that now, as I think we become more global and you have more universal access. And I think when the success of something like Spirited Away, I think helped do away with that and help.
Well, and I think too, there's just not as much of a, I don't know if stigma is the right word, but there's not as much of a negative connotation. I think nowadays when you hear anime to a U.S. audience, when I think more so when we were younger, it seemed like people frowned more upon it or had an adverse reaction to it just at the, oh, that's an anime, it got brushed aside, where I don't think that's even close to being a thing as much anymore. I think it's, with the internet and all kinds of other things, there's just more of a global presence of all different styles of all different things. So I don't know if that's how accurate that is, but I just get that feeling that there was more of like a stigma to anime during our childhood.
I think so, because I think like when someone said anime, I thought of Akira and pretty much something else, and like those commercials you would see late at night where like you had to order it from like 800 number or something like that.
Nice.
All right. Anything else before we bring this episode to a close?
Are we doing scores for this one?
That's a good point. There you go. All right. Well, Kevin, you said this was the best out of the three. I am curious to hear what you actually would give this a score from 1 to 10.
Well, I'm not the only one that says it's the best out of the three so far. It is the best Rotten Tomatoes score so far that we've covered.
Well, there you go.
It has 95% on Rotten Tomatoes compared to the 87 and 91 of the previous two films, but they're all obviously rated real high. Like I said, I think over time this one will diminish more and Nausicaa will probably rise more on my scoring, but as initial view, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. Just for that fact that I think maybe it will have diminishing returns if I watched it again or as time passes. But I'm going to give it a 7 to try to kind of predict that.
Amanda, what would your score be?
I think I'm middle of the road. I'm going to give it a 5.
Man, all right, man. And Matt, your score?
I would say it's probably my least favorite, like, Miyazaki original. Like, if we throw out Lupin, since it's a franchise and the rest are all his originals, I would say it's probably my least favorite of all of the ones I've seen, so I'll give it a 7.
Well, I will also give it a 7 as well. I think looking back on it, something like the last film, Nausicaa, probably a 9 for me. This one's still good, but it's a little bit of a step down, but still a really solid animated film and another solid note for his career, but overall just was hoping for a little bit more, but still I think a high recommend for a 7.
3 people giving it the same score.
There you go. I thought about going 7.5, but I didn't want to.
So did I.
We'll see how it goes. We still got a lot of movies to talk about. So, and
for sure,
next time we talk about Miyazaki, we mentioned it in this episode. We will be getting into My Neighbor Totoro, and I'm kind of curious about that because that is, we were seeing these epic films, and for what I can remember, Totoro does go a little bit of a different direction, but it's been a while since I've seen it, so we'll see that. But make sure to contact us. Let us know what you think of this episode and this movie. You can do so by contacting us at emailing us at feedback@geekcastradio.com. Podcast is also on Twitter at Cinema Geekcast. Kevin, what is your Twitter name?
At Optimus Solo.
Amanda?
Hard Candy Mandy, eyes, no eyes.
And Matt?
I am at Fridley Scent.
And I am at Movie Revolt. But this is the end for this week. Make sure to turn in next week for another amazing episode of the Cinema Geeks. We'll catch you next time.